Hi, I'm the Reverend Dr. Chris Tenny-Brittian, but much more importantly, I get to be your instructor for this course on spiritual development. This is course number 17, Spiritual Development 112 for the Ministry Training Program at Phillips Theological Seminary. It is going to be a great next 8 weeks. At least it's got the makings of that, if I do say so myself. You've got some readings for this week, but what I really want to do, what I really want to focus on is the syllabus and walking through. I know some of you may be new to syllabi. I know this is a new syllabus for all of you. So let's walk that through. That way you're going to know what I expect of you, somewhat of what you can expect of me, and what we can expect of one another. So if you'll pull out your syllabus and walk through with me, I'll give you a moment to get that. May have to put this on pause, because here we go. Our course description. The purpose of this course is to establish and maintain spiritual disciplines that lead to personal growth and help others develop a spiritual life. That means this course is for you and for those with whom you get to work. I recognize that some of you may be ministers. Well, you're all ministers, okay? We're all ministers in our own rights. But some of you may already be ordained. You may be commissioned. You may be a leader, a lay leader, a non-ordained or commissioned leader in your church. You may be working towards ordination or commissioning or licensing. This is really built for everyone. It's for your own development, but it also has this side piece that you can walk along and help others with their development as well. If you are in the Christian church, Disciples of Christ, and working towards ministry or are in a form of ministry that has credentialing or standing associated with it, this is very important for you to know. There are 16 ministerial practices that candidates for ordained and commissioned ministry have to be competent in, if you will. This course fulfills the requirements for the spiritual development piece. So as a result of this course, you will be able, all of you, whether you're in the Christian church, Disciples of Christ or not, you will be able to identify, recognize, and work out of your familiarity with the different stages of faith. You're going to engage in a variety of spiritual practices as a faithful response to God's calling and continued creation. One of my favorite. You're going to practice spiritual disciplines that engage one with the world. Another one of my favorites. Use spiritual practices to deepen and maintain a vision for justice and compassion. You're going to be able to teach spiritual practices and advise others about their use in pastoral care contexts, both one-on-one and in groups. And you will be able to identify individuals and groups with whom spiritual practices can be engaged in accountable relationships. The required texts, I hope you have them. I can't tell you how many courses I've taught over these past few years where students come in without the required texts. If you don't have them, get them. Hopefully you have a Bible. We're going to be using James Fowler's Stages of Faith, The Psychology of Human Development and the Quest for Meaning. You may notice that that's an older book, 1995, but it remains one of the quintessential, hands down, best work that talks about faith development. And that's going to be important for us as we talk about spiritual development. Let me jump ahead to the William Tenny-Brittian. There are 2 books that he's written around spiritual development. One is High Voltage Spirituality, and the other, actually his first, is Prayer for People Who Can't Sit Still. High Voltage Spirituality remains my favorite book. Actually, I think my favorite book written by him, but definitely my favorite book about spiritual practices and spiritual development. And I'll say more about that and why in the coming weeks. Prayer for People Who Can't Sit Still was written from his perspective as one who has ADHD. He really thought he could never be a contemplative, which I am. He would never be able to sit down and meditate. He just figured he would never ever be able to have very much of a relationship with God other than the heady stuff and knowing scripture and those pieces of ministry and being a Christian, a disciple, little d disciple there. And then he discovered that those ways didn't meet his ways and didn't help him to develop practices that would put him into a deeper relationship with God. And out of that came Prayer for People Who Can't Sit Still. And it's helped hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in the church and even people outside the church develop those spiritual practices. And as for my name on there, I wrote just earlier in 2018 a 6-week study called From Hope to Habit. It's a workbook to be used in small group settings to help adults move from saying, oh, I wish I had this, or, oh, I really want to have a good relationship. I hope to increase my spirituality or my spiritual habits, my spiritual disciplines, which we say all the time. And this moves you from those hopes to building some habits. So this is where we're really going to get to practice spiritual practices, try different ones, have opportunities to talk about that as though we were in a small group sitting in our living room with other people. We're going to come out of that with not just having experienced that, but having the tools, a facilitator's guide, seeing and learning how you can lead this yourself within your church and with others that might be seeking. Course requirements. There will be assigned readings every week from our required texts. I may have some articles, other pieces. As you can see, there were so many books, or probably no, there were so many books I wanted to draw from. And I knew I wanted Fowler in there, and I knew I wanted us to work with Bill's books. I knew that we were going to work with this 6-week study. And I have bookshelves and bookshelves of books that I thought, wow, that would be great. And as an editor of the Net Results magazine, Evangelism and Church Growth magazine, I knew we get books all the time to review, and I knew that there's the latest and the greatest, and so I had to just whittle it down, and I figured I can give you pieces of these other books that you can read, and that's what we'll be doing on other assignments, okay? You've got to read each week's readings. You've got this video lectures like this, and you're going to have reflection or discussion questions that are up on our discussion boards. I suggest that you watch the video lecture first, unless you're reading ahead, which is awesome. But before you can't answer or look at or respond to reflection questions, though, until you've watched that vid lecture. And I'm going to tell you, you may slide by that, or you may try to slide by that, but every course I've had at least one student who was so gangbuster, and they would start answering those questions even before the lecture had been posted. That's how I knew that they had not yet watched it. And I also know how to count how many people, and can even check, I think, on who has watched it. So don't miss that opportunity. In these weeks ahead, there will be 2 vid lectures each week. One vid lecture will be a general overview, such as what we're doing here and now. The other will be the introduction to the Hope to Habit chapter or week that we're working on. That way you'll be able to see how you would introduce that, how you would use that in a group. And again, I'll say more about that next week is the week that we'll get started around that. So make sure that you take the time for the lecture and work with those reflection questions, do all of your reading. The discussion forum is a huge part of your grade. In fact, the majority of your grade rests on those reflection questions and how you interact with one another. I've put times down and by when you have to respond, because you're responding, well, other people's responses and responding depends on your responses. You can't interact with another student or with other students if you don't have responses with which to interact. So by noon every Wednesday, you have to have responded to my set of questions for you. And those responses have to show that you have interacted with the texts and the materials, that you have an understanding of them, that you've looked at that Vid-Lecture, that you've done your homework in the From Hope to Habit course, any other relevant resources. All of that is going to feed into your responses. Respond thoughtfully, respectfully. Don't copy other people's works. If you're going to quote from somewhere, make sure that you document what your quotes are. And I want you to pull in outside resources. You get extra points if you pull in outside resources, but make sure you as a resource are present. So by Wednesday at noon, you're going to post your responses, and then beginning after noon, after 12 o'clock noon, you start to interact with other students' posts, and by at least 3 other students' posts. And by noon on Thursday, your first 3 interactions have to be completed. I've never taught a class where students don't interact with all the other students, even when there have been large classes. So pay attention, watch what people are saying, and react to that. Now, respond. I don't want you reacting, right? I want you to respond. This isn't the place for smallpox. Oh, that was a good thought. Oh, I thought about that. I don't really care about your opinions. This is the time to exchange thoughts and learnings and knowledge, and to move. Remember, none of us are experts. We're all bringing pieces of ourselves and what we've learned and how we're synthesizing what we're learning. I've never had a class, never have taught a class where I haven't learned not something, but some things that are just very important. New insights, ways of looking at things that I had never had before. So you want to select main points and ideas from others' work. You want to provide further personal reflection, raise questions, explore the issues out there. If someone raises a question, look for an answer, not the answer. Look for an answer, a response. If someone raises an issue, explore a variety of other views. Bring in relevant outside resources. Again, there that is, but cite them. Engage in collaborative learning. Bring your whole self into this, knowing that you are a piece of a whole, and that what you bring, which is hopefully your best, what you bring and what each one of us brings is what the Spirit will take and make into so much more than what we respectively, each in our own ways, bring. One of my absolute requirements is that we interact with the utmost of integrity and respect. Respect is the key of the day. We don't argue a viewpoint or try to win somebody over to our side. We don't make comments of any sort about somebody's response. We don't bully, we don't denigrate, speak down to others because we don't agree with where they are. We are all peers and together in this course. So, okay, first responses by Wednesday, interactions with first 3 people by noon on Thursday. We're going to continue to interact with one another until 3 o'clock on Saturday. At 3 o'clock on Saturday, as much as I can figure it out on Moodle, all conversation ends. No more conversation, because you need to take and get some rest. Those of you who may be preaching or teaching or have other responsibility in a church, you need to take and get ready for that, and take care of what you need to take care of. And first comes God, second comes you, then your family, however you define your family, and then comes the church. Do you hear that? God is always first. You are second. If you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to take care of anybody else. God, you, then your family. That might include close friends, and then the church and other work. The church is not God. God does not equal church. God, you, family, church, and other responsibilities that are there. So you've got a lot going on in your lives, right? Saturday afternoon, I want you to take that space that you need to be more fully prepared for Sunday, and maybe that's just resting and relaxing. Sunday, you're going to go to church, maybe go to church on Saturday night. So maybe that's what you're going to do with your Saturday afternoon. Sunday, however way you look at it, whether it starts as a day of rest or it gets to start at the midday or the mid-afternoon, you take that as a day of rest and you take care of you. So day off, no work for the class. If you have written assignments, we'll have one, I know, final at the end. Anytime I give a written assignment, you will have until 9 o'clock to finish that on the day that it's due. That's 9 o'clock Central Time. In fact, I'm saying these times. So the times that I list are 3 o'clock, are Central Time. So 3 o'clock Central's, 4 o'clock Eastern, right? 2 o'clock Mountain, 1 o'clock Pacific Time. So that's the way we're working on that one. Yeah, just do your best. And I'll make sure that I get written assignments to you at least 2 weeks before they'll be due. Okay, so you're looking at your course expectations. Basically, I've gone over them. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you are having problems or struggles, contact me. My email, chris@theology.life, or my phone number. You can call there. Likely you'll need to leave a message, but please do. Make sure if I email you that you respond within 24 hours, and I will do the same. I will respond to you within 24 hours, and I will always have your assignments graded and back to you no later than 1 week after they're due. I don't want to go step by step through this grading. You can see for yourself what that looks like. This will be used every week to calculate your weekly grade, and then I'll average those out at the end of the course. So let's look just at our first week assignment. You can see there that the day of the week, the days that it goes from, and then here are your resources to engage. This Vid-Lecture. You're going to read pages 1 through 39. I know that you're probably just getting your book, that we're just starting this week. You may not have read pages 1 through 39, but don't worry, because there aren't going to be any questions about it this week. I want you to read the first 15 pages of High Voltage. It's an introduction. The first 7 pages of Prayer for People Who Can't Sit Still, and then chapter 1 in Prayer for People Who Can't Sit Still. High Voltage, Prayer for People are quick reads. grasp onto them. Look at the big print. Look at the headings, and that's going to tell you there's a lot of to-dos, how to do in those. So spend time with those. Your reflection questions then. There it is again. Reflection questions, Wednesday at noon, Thursday at noon, interactions, continue interacting until 3 p.m. on Saturday. And that goes all the way through to the end of the semester. I do also want to point out that you're going to see at the end of each section each week. So week 1 is introduction. Week 2, let's hone in on that for a moment. Week 2 is movement, stages of faith, and from hopes to habits. And after that, you see objectives 1, 2, 3, and 5. If you go back up and look at that first page, you see the objectives. And these numbers are the objectives that are being fulfilled. Again, this way, particularly for those of you who are in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, but I know other judicatories, UCC is one that comes to mind. They are looking, our committees or commissions on ministry look at how have you fulfilled these objectives. If you're already a minister in one of these denominations and you're required to do continuing ed, which all of us are in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and so if we're doing continuing ed, you're able to say, hey, I took this course on spiritual development, these were our objectives, and I fulfilled them. Make sure you keep copies of discussions and of your work so you have something to turn in. Remember that we want to be really careful as we're discussing, because nothing online is confidential anymore. Be honest, but be careful about how honest you are as you're posting. If you ever have anything, again, these issues or if matters come up for you, please come and tell me and we'll work that through. So I want to say one last word about me and who I am and why spiritual development is such an exciting course for me and it has been such an exciting prospect to teach. I did not become a Christian until I was 22. And before that, we went to church from the time I was 4 until I was 10. And when my mom died, my dad proclaimed that there was no God and pulled us out of church. And there was always something in me that knew about that. Even at 12 and 13, I knew that I had been created to be a minister. And yet I was told, well, you're a girl, and girls can't be ministers, and you don't go to church. And as I got a little bit older, I began really to wonder, how is it that somebody could be as active in the church as my mom and dad were? And how could somebody like my dad be so active in the church, a deacon, a Sunday school teacher, a young adult ministry coordinator? He and my mother worked with the associate minister of that church to put together a young adult and then a young couples group. So they were so involved. We had the book of worship in our book cabinet there at home. But how could someone with such a great relationship with the church then denounce God? And I really struggled with that. And once I found myself back in church at that age of 22, that always guided me. How could that be? And then I was given a book called From the Heart of a Woman, written by a woman named Carol Mayhall. From the Heart of a Woman, from Carol Mayhall. This is back in the 80s. And she wrote that book either late 70s, early 80s. If you can find copies on Amazon and eBay for 99 cents plus $3.99 for shipping. I've given away so many of those books that actually I had started by lending the books but never getting them back. So now I hoard them. No, not really, but I buy them in groupings so that I have them to give away to people. And why I loved that book and continue to love that book so much is that Carol talked about her own lack of spiritual development, and how when her husband went to Bible college, they were very, very young, and she became really resentful, and he was in a small group, really working on his own, growing in his own spiritual habits and practices, and she was not, and she was becoming increasingly bitter. And it wasn't until she began to develop spiritual habits that her life began to change. So she taught about how to pray. And all I'd ever seen before were people who were reading their prayers. My prayer devotion was reading a line of scripture and a little reflection on that scripture, and then maybe a 1 or 2 sentence prayer in something like Our Daily Bread. I'm not dissing Our Daily Bread. It's wonderful. But I guess it was time for a little more meat in my life, and I was ready for that. And she talked about prayer groups and small groups, how to pray, how to read scripture, and on and on and on. And I went to my pastor and I said, could we have a prayer group? And he said, yes, Chris, we can have a prayer group. And that is where my life began to change. Several years later, I was in my first pastorate in a little rural town. I've always lived in big cities. I was completely out of my element. There were more cattle in the county. Actually, there were more cattle in the town than there were people in the county. Completely out of my element, and I became increasingly depressed, and I knew I needed to do something. And I found a spiritual life center 90 miles away and went over there and established a relationship with a spiritual director. And my life changed even more greatly from there. I could tell you more, not today. Maybe at points along the way in this course, maybe it'll be up on the discussion board, and maybe it won't be. But I have to say, hands down, it's through spiritual development, developing spiritual practices, that your relationship with Jesus and God are going to change. They are going to deepen, even if you've got a deep, deep, deep relationship. We're going to get deeper. We're going to become more habitual. We're going to move past just mere hopes wherever we are. But more importantly, we're not doing this just for ourselves. We're going to do this so that we can help change the lives of others, which will help change churches, which will help then lead more people into the kingdom. I look forward to seeing you on the discussion boards. Thank you so much for being here. Bye-bye.